In this video, we will pick up with the hierarchical model that we did in the previous video and continue adding on to the model. So let's go back to the model that we finished in the last video. As you recall, we created a tandem queuing server. So we have a facility view where we placed our two servers and set up the configuration. We defined our two reference properties, and then we define the input and output nodes, and then we place those object instances into our model. So what I want to do now is delete these from our model, and let's create another model. So I'm going to go to my new model and add a fixed class, and this time I'm going to name my new model cell. And for our cell, we're going to place three tandem queuing objects. So there's our first tandem queuing object, there's our second tandem queuing object, and there's our third tandem queuing object. And our cell is going to operate with our tandem queuing objects in parallel. So I will place a transfer node so that I can specify how to direct entities to our individual tandem servers. And so I'll just connect my transfer node to the individual inputs to our tandem queuing server objects, and then we'll place an output node or another transfer node here that will represent our output node and connect those up also with connectors. And so now that I have my logic defined, let's move this in and update the video or update the object just a little bit. And then we can switch to the external view, and as we said in the previous video, the default external view just shows all of the visible objects from the facility view. And so I'm going to just leave that this time, and then we'll add our input and output nodes. So we'll add our external node, and we'll just superimpose that here on transfer node 1. And the node class is transfer node, and the input location is simply transfer node 1 in our facility view. And so we'll then name that node input just as we did before. Similarly, I will take an external node and superimpose that on transfer node 2 and specify that our external node is a transfer node. We don't have an input location, and then we specify the name as output. Finally, go back to my facility view, select my transfer node 2, go to the advanced options so that we can map that node or bind that node to the external output node called output. And now that I have my cell object defined, I'll go back to my model, zoom out just a little bit, and now in our project library we can see that we have our tandem object that we defined before, and now we have our new cell object, which I can just place instances just like with any other object from the library. So I'll place that object, connect up our source and our sink, and we can simply run the model. And so now we have our cell, which consists of three parallel tandem queuing servers. And we can also continue to add, and so I could go, let me stop the model here, and let's just add another cell here, and then we can add a tandem queuing server here. And so now we have three things in parallel. We have two cells and one tandem server, all in parallel from our server. And so now when we run our model, we can see that we process the entities as specified by the individual objects, the tandem object and the cell object. So now the last thing we're going to do to this model is let's rename our model to be facility. So now I have a cell object, a tandem object, and a facility object, and I can then go create a new fixed class called model, and in fact I can place instances of my facility. So I can have a facility here, I can have a facility here, can have a facility here, and when we run, because we have individual sources and sinks, we can see that all of these object instances are operating independently. Of course, we could have also defined input and output locations and transferred entities between these facilities, but in this case, we'll just leave it as is. So the last thing I want to do in this video is let's stop the model, and then let's go in and look at how we could save these object definitions for later use. So what I'm going to do is delete my model, so that now I have simply the facility, the tandem, and the cell object, and I'm going to now save this under a different name. So let me go and find the location, lab module 12, and let's just save it as my library, which I had already done previously. So now we have a model, we have a project that includes the facility, the tandem, and the cell object definition. So I can then go and create a new model. So I just say, File New, create a new model. And now I'm going to go to Project Home and the Load Library ribbon and simply navigate to find my library that I just defined. And you can see my library now includes our 3 custom defined objects, along with the model entity that we left in there. And so here I can place a tandem, I can place a cell, I can place a facility. In this case, let's go back to our standard library here. Let's have a source, let's have a sink, and then let's connect these up, our path to our tandem, to the sink, from the source to the cell, from the cell to the sink, and now we can just click go, and we can see that our facility object is operating completely independently because we had defined the source and the sink with its own model entity type, and then our locally defined source and sink with our tandem and cell instances. And so when I attach as a library, I don't have access to the internal workings of the object definitions. However, I can always go back to my original, so I don't want to save that, and let's just go back and open my library. And now we have the original object definitions for facility, tandem, and cell, which we can then modify and update and change and so on. So in summary, what we've done here is we've hierarchically built this library containing a tandem queuing server. We then built a cell, which is comprised of 3 tandem queuing servers in parallel, and finally a facility that has 2 cells and a tandem server and a source and a sink. And so we created these. You can tell that the definition of hierarchical model building or hierarchical object building comes from the fact that we hierarchically use the standard library objects and then our custom objects to build more and more complex objects. Of course, we could go back for all of our objects, the cell and the facility in particular, where we did nothing with the user view. We just used the standard user view, and we could go back and make these look more indicative of the objects that we're representing. But for this case, we'll just leave those with the standard view. So to build new object definitions using the hierarchical method, we basically develop the logic using the object instances from either the standard library or from a custom library. The process is definition and data, as we do usually when we build models. Then we define the external view. And finally, we added the external nodes where appropriate, so that entities could either could enter and leave the object. And then optionally, we could save the project as a file to be loaded in other projects as a library. So building objects in the hierarchical method is extremely powerful. It lets us build highly complex objects and then reuse those object definitions in subsequent models.